Welcome everyone to our next session of our Harvard Love Data Week programming. So Love Data Week is really dedicated to spreading awareness of the importance of research data management, data sharing, preservation, and reuse. And we are hosting a week of events, these webinars every day this week at 12 p.m. So thank you for joining us today. This year, we are focusing on some practical resources and tips to help you and researchers at any stage of your career to use these good data practices. So be sure to register for the other sessions that we are hosting this week. Tomorrow, we will be talking about data availability statements. And then on Friday, we'll wrap it up with some resources, these research data management checklists, which you can use throughout the data lifecycle, which we will talk about today. Just some logistics. We are recording today's session, and you'll receive a link to the recording and the slides later today. You are encouraged to ask questions, but please mute yourself unless you are speaking. And then please provide some feedback at the end of today's session. I'll link you to a quick survey. So today our webinar topic is on the DMPTool. This is a one-stop shop for data management plans. And welcome everyone. I am Julie Goldman, Research Data Services Librarian at Countway Library at Harvard Medical School. For Countway and Harvard Library, I offer a lot of these types of data management training classes, but I'm also available if you want to identify some of these best practices for working with your data, creating a data management plan, or finding data. I also co-chair the Longwood Medical Area Research Data Management Working Group, and this working group includes many members of our research community who meet each month to talk about research data management, create these awesome resources that we have for you, provide guidance, and it's a great community that we can, a hive mind that we can use to solve all of our kind of data management issues and challenges. All right, so in today's session, we are going to talk about data management plans and the DMPTool. So first, you'll understand what makes a good data management plan. We'll go through some example language. Then we'll navigate DMPTool to help you write, share, and download a grant-ready data management plan. And I will show you how you can utilize a new HMS data management plan template that we have created. And as a note, the DMPTool, I'm going to show you how you can access it as a Harvard affiliate. But you do not need to be a Harvard affiliate to use the DMPTool. However, there are some guidance and examples that will be specific for Harvard affiliates. So you won't have access to that or the specific template that I will show. But DMPTool is a free tool that anyone can use. We'll talk about that later in today's session. I do want to mention that Longwood Medical Area Research Data Management Working Group has a great website full of this information and resources, including DMPs and DMPTool. If you attended Monday's session, you got an inside look at this newly redesigned website. But either way, I really invite you to explore this website to help you construct your DMP and then also just along your data management journey. First, let's understand why data management is important for research and talk about when that planning comes into play. Data management covers how data is organized, backed up, documented, and shared. So basically, can you or someone else find and use your data? And data management is a part of this data sharing piece, which is increasingly visible because of concerns related to research reproducibility and transparency. And if the purpose of data sharing is to allow others to examine or build upon your work, it's important that your data is managed in such a way that makes that actually possible. And even if you're not sharing your data, publicly, you still don't want to lose it or lose track of your workflows or your analyses. So here on the slide is a very nice depiction of this research data lifecycle, and data management happens throughout this lifecycle of a research project. And additionally, within those kind of larger stages we saw, there are many activities, resources, and entities that may be involved depending on the type of research project and where that research is occurring. And data management is a sum of a number of small practices that add up to your data ultimately being findable and reusable. And in this expanded view that we're looking at of the life cycle, it shows on the outer kind of circle these additional practices that you should be implementing throughout the project. With these additional kind of activities, it's also a great visual to help you navigate that website I mentioned and find those best practices you are looking for. So in the basic sense, data management begins even before your project starts. You want to plan processes from onboarding project and team members to closing out the project, and then all of the data resources used and generated throughout. So research planning concerns all aspects of preparing for a research project. So starting early is a really good idea. It includes seeking, funding, having awareness of university and sponsored requirements, the organization of data, records, tools, and resources needed to conduct the research, and then how you disseminate and archive those valuable results you create. And the most utilized way for this is to create a data management plan. And we see data management plans on our life cycle in that outer rim falling under that plan and design stage. So let's understand, why data management plans are so important or why there's so much focus on them. And DMPs have become the standard or most utilized form of research planning, mostly because funders, grant agencies have started requiring them. So here is a historical but also future timeline of the requirements from our funding agencies in the US. Funders not only want grant-supported research to be shared and made publicly available, they also want to understand how the underlying data will be managed throughout the course of your grant. So we see in 2003, the National Institutes of Health, NIH, started requiring a data sharing plan for certain applications. You are expected to submit a plan for sharing final research data for research purposes. This is not a full-fledged data management plan. It only really focuses on that kind of data sharing piece. Then in 2011, the NSF was actually the first agency to require a 2-page supplementary data management plan that fully described the organization, dissemination, and sharing of research results. In 2013, the Executive Office of the President's Office of Science and Technology Policy memo came out. This basically directed federal agencies to develop plans to make the research of federally funded research freely available to the public. So we see the government putting a priority to making funded activities available to the public. And since then, we have seen many other key granting organizations like NASA and the Alfred Sloan Foundation They now require submitters to include this data management plan as part of their application. And then kind of looking to the future, but most recently, at the end of October, NIH came out with this new revised data management and sharing plan. So in addition to data sharing, they also now want to understand that full data management piece for research grants. This policy will not go into effect until 2023, so we have some time to do some outreach, some training about these data management plans, and prepare for when that policy is enacted. So that's a nice historical look. But here I want to stress, rather than being a required document for funding applications, which yes, we want to be compliant, here I want to recommend the data management plan as a living document that describes all of the practices we talk about for any research project. So a data management plan is a written document outlining plans for handling all of the data resulting from a research project in both the short and long term. It includes detailed procedures for your data collection, how you're going to organize and process your data before, while you're working on it within the lab, and then also have a plan for the data to leave your lab so that others can find and access it in perpetuity. But by creating a data management plan for your data at the beginning of the project, you will save time and effort later. It should be a living document that is frequently referred to and updated as your research evolves. So that's why I want to stress that a data management plan is really for any research project, no matter what your funding situation is. So that's why we should create data management plans for any research project. So here we're seeing the elements of a data management plan, and many funders have created kind of, their own policies, their own templates for what you need to include, but they generally ask for the same information. So here is a list of those sections in a very generic template created by the Digital Curation Center. This is a really good place to start if you don't have funder requirements or you have never created a data management plan before. And this template has 7 elements of the project that you should address. And we are going to go through each of these elements in the first part of this webinar and talk about some example language. I do want to point out, while yes, this is a very generic template, these sections are very close to actually the new NIH required elements. So this is a good way to get started with data management plans and look ahead to that new NIH data management policy. All right, so let's walk through each of these stages and talk about what makes a good, data management plan answer, if you will. So the first element of our DMP is data collection. So in this section, you will be describing the types of data you are collecting and how it will be collected. This should also include the amount of data you expect to collect and file formats. So you can ask questions to yourself like, what data will you collect or create? How will the data be collected or created? And also look ahead to how that data will be organized. So I'm going to provide 2 examples, and I want you, participants on our webinar today, to tell me which of these 2 examples is the better answer for supplying information about data collection for our data management plan. So as I read through these, you can add a 1 or 2 into the chat of which one you think is a good example. So our example 1, this project will produce 2, 3, and 4-dimensional microscopy images of mouse cells in the TIFF image format. Individual images will be anywhere from a couple gigabytes to hundreds of gigabytes in size. We expect to produce 50 terabytes of image data over the course of the entire project. And this proposal includes funding to store all data for 3 years past the tenure of the grant. Our second example says the nature of the data or other materials produced under the sponsored project will include data characteristics such as observational, experimental, reference, derived, simulated, and or other. The data types referenced could include data generated by computer, data collected from sensors or instruments, images, video files, reports, and or other. And awesome, I see that we have votes for example 1, and that is correct. Example 2 was super generic. This paragraph kind of reads as if it was listed from the funder documentation, telling you nothing about the actual nature of the actual data to be generated in the proposal. So example 1 has a good level of detail to include. We know the types of data that are generated, how much data, the volume. So ensure that when you are thinking about this section of your plan, you stick to, describing the types of data to be generated in your project. Great. Let's move on to the next section, which is documentation and metadata. So metadata, if you're not familiar, is often described as data about data. It's that structured information that describes, explains, locates, and otherwise represents something. So your metadata should be collected and preserved and documented alongside the data you're collecting. It makes it possible to retrieve, use, or manage that data. So in your plan, you should explain how you will be capturing that metadata. And questions include what documentation and metadata you will collect and where that documentation is going to be stored. It's also good to think here about specific metadata standards that you will use. And just as some examples, your protocols, code books, README files are good examples of supporting documentation. So let's look at 2 examples. Again, I'll read both and you let me know which number example is good. So example 1, metadata will be generated to describe the data generated in README format and will be stored alongside the data. Metadata standards will be applied during the creation of metadata. Example 2, images will be saved in the native file type of the microscope, ZIS LSM, and converted to the OME TIFF format. OME TIFF images use the OME XML metadata standard to document images. We will document our data in lab notebooks, and digital readme.txt files. All files will be named using the form they give an example. And awesome, I'm seeing some number 2 votes for number 2 in the chat. That is correct. Example 1, this answer is really too vague to be informative. Yes, they do mention readmes, but example 1 really has that those elements that we want to include, like metadata standards, versioning management strategies in that file naming convention they gave, as well as talking about some open formats that they're going to be using. Great. We will move on to the next section, which focuses on ethics and legal compliance. So here we really want to explain how you will be addressing any intellectual property rights, how you will be handling maybe participant consent. A note on consent: if you do plan on, sharing any of your data from your project, you need to include that in your participant consent at the beginning of your project. So it's good to plan ahead. If you did not get participant consent to share any of your data at the beginning of your project, you really cannot then share their data at the end of your project. So always good to think about participant consent. And then also you need to include what steps you are taking to maintain the confidentiality of study participants. If you plan on anonymizing your data, this is a good section where you should describe how you're going to do that. So looking at two examples for language in this section, our first example says users of field data should acknowledge and or offer co-authorship to the investigators who collect the data. Example 2 says our research group has been trained in human subjects protection and only trained project staff operating under the IRB approval for the project will have access to the confidential, individually identifiable data, and all data will be aggregated or anonymized for publication. Give you a second to think about these two options. It looks like we have some votes for example 2. Yes. This is a good example because it really touches on the considerations that have to be made when working specifically with human subjects data. I will say this could be improved by adding some clarifying information on how that data access will be provided. There's kind of say access. I would like some details on how that would actually happen. And then again, touching on, if there was participant consent to share that de-identified data. And then example 1 was kind of a less developed answer because, this is important to include, but the guidance on the data licensing is very unclear. All right, moving on to our next section of our plan, which is storage and backup. So storage and backup actually is going to affect the entire research project. That's why we saw, the store and manage at that center of our life cycle. But in this section of the plan, you need to explain, where you are storing the data and how it will be backed up. You need to think about how you'll ensure the integrity of your data and manage, access of your team and collaborators, and then also kind of at the end of the project. So include here, talk about how often the data will be backed up, how many copies you'll make of that data, how you will manage that access and security, maybe talking about how your collaborators can access the data. So let's look at these two examples for store and manage. So first example, the code and data will be stored and backed up redundantly on the Harvard Medical School storage system managed by IT. This system includes daily backups of the data to 2 physically separate sites. Moreover, security of the data is evaluated and assured according to Harvard University data policies. Example 2 says the original raw and processed data will remain on the lab computer under the account of the person that generated and analyzed that data. These are standard procedures in our lab. Great. All on top of it, I see votes for example 1. Yes, this example really focuses on that short-term storage practice, including those automatic backups and security evaluation. I would say this example could be enhanced by including more information on how data may be physically protected. For example, that the computers are stored in a key card access facility with, strong passwords, fire protection, all of that. Also, the security statement is important but less developed. I would maybe include more specific policies that the group would be following. And then our example 2 was less developed because this includes nothing about our backup or security plan. I am also worried about this practice because what if, the person that they're talking about in this situation leaves the lab, or the lab computer breaks or fails and that was, the only copy? How would the research team, recover any lost data files? So good to have multiple copies of your data available. All right, so moving on to our next section, which is selection and preservation. For this section of the data management plan, you will describe how long you plan to retain the data and how it will be preserved. So here you need to evaluate the data at some point of your project. So you need to understand which data you've collected are of long-term value and should be retained, shared, or preserved. And then what is that long-term preservation plan for the data set? You need to include how long you need to retain your data. So Harvard has its own policies regarding data retention timelines, but you also must take into account any IRB protocols or funder requirements. So let's take a look at some examples here for preservation section. So first example, we will retain all data which are necessary to validate research findings for 7 years on our group's public server for a minimum of 3 years after the conclusion of the award or public release, whichever comes later. And then example 2, upon finalization, the calving histories we derived from satellite data will be submitted to the National Snow and Ice Data Center for permanent archival and will also be converted into .kmz files for display in Google Earth as part of a broader effort to catalog our results and inform the public about coastal change in the region of Antarctica. Great. Yes, so I see some votes for example 2, which is great. Yes, this is an excellent example for choosing an appropriate disciplinary data repository, and also alludes to how the data will be maybe useful to other, researchers in the future. They also talk about making files, converting files into a format that would be useful to others. And then in our example 1 is less developed because yes, they do give a nice explicit time frame, which is good to include, but storing data on a public or lab server does not constitute a reliable long-term data archiving solution, much for the same reasons we talked about when we talked about data storage. Also, locating that data, it's not publicly available, so others may not be able to find it and then access it. All right, so a related section has to do with the act of actually data sharing. So in this section, you will need to explain how you'll comply with maybe the funding agency's data sharing requirements. You also need to address any data sharing restrictions. Again, if you're working with human subject data, you need to think about what restrictions your data has. Maybe you can't share it publicly. You need to explain why that is. So some questions here are, how will you share that data? Are there any restrictions on data sharing? And maybe here you need to include, will you require a data use agreement if people want to use your data in the future? Let's look at 2 examples here. So our first example, code will be deposited on the lab's public GitHub repository, and the data will be deposited in this collaborative research in computational neuroscience. All publicly shared data will be licensed with a Creative Commons 0 license. It is expected that users that employ a data set generated from this grant will provide a citation. And then our example 2, data can be accessed by general public through publications in conferences, journals, etc. Good, I see lots of votes for example number 1. This is a thorough description of where the data and supporting documentation will be made available. And also includes, a research community appropriate repository, and also some nice license and reuse language that is very standard for research data. Our example 2 was pretty poor. Most journals are restricted to, subscribers, so that supplementary material is certainly not available to everyone. Remember that even if you're, publishing an article, that does not mean data sharing. All right, let's wrap up with our tour of a data management plan with our last section, which deals with responsibilities and resources. So here you want to describe, who is responsible for the various components of the data management plan, and then data management activities throughout a project. Also talk about any resources such as equipment, hardware, software that you will be needed to successfully implement your plan. So 2 examples that we'll look at here. So example 1, there will be no change to the scope of this data management plan should the PI or co-PI leave the university. And our example 2, Joe and Mary have completed training for access to the REDCap data capture and management system. Additionally, software licenses for the qualitative data coding and Vivo and statistical analysis, SPSS, will be purchased after IRB approval. The Open Science Framework will be used in order to control permission level access to data. And awesome, I see some votes for example 2 here. Great. So yes, example 2 is really good. They name specific individuals and state their roles in managing specific types of data. And it also includes the various software that they will be using throughout the project. For example 1, the scope of the data management plans needs to include provisions for what will be done in this case should the PI or co-PI leave the university. So stating that it will not change is pretty insufficient. All right. There are more examples at the end of the slide. I'm going to pause here for just a quick second and see if there are any questions before we take a look at a resource, the DMP tool, to help us craft our DMP. Seeing no questions, feel free to answer any into the chat. I'm glad those were some helpful examples. Again, I'll send out the slides and you'll be able to explore even more examples on your own time. For help creating a data management plan, there is a tool, DMPTool, which is an online resource that includes the many agency and organization DMP templates, including the Digital Curation Center template. To be clear, funding agencies are requiring a data management plan, but they do not require you to, use DMPTool. So DMPTool is an open source project and anyone can sign in and access these templates and create a data management plan. Harvard is an institutional member for DMPTool, and it's recommended that you log in with your Harvard key So this way you will have access to those Harvard specific guidance to help you create your plan. If you're at another institution that may also be a member and they may have customized their DMPTool instance with, your institution, university specific policies or guidelines. Let's walk through how to log in. So you can do this by navigating to DMPTool.org and use the sign in the upper right-hand corner. You will see three options pop up. So if your institution is affiliated with DMPTool, if your institution is not affiliated, if you need to create an account. So if you have a Harvard key, then you choose, option 1, since Harvard is an institutional affiliate. If you do not have a Harvard key, you can either search for your institution through option 1. You can use option 2 to log into your account, or click option 3 to create an account with any email address. I'm going to walk you through option 1. So clicking that, we look for Harvard University or another affiliated institution, and we click go. So by choosing Harvard University, we are prompted with that Harvard Key portal. So you would enter your credentials here and log in. So great. If we are now logged into DMPTool, we come to our main dashboard. So let's take a quick tour of some of the features and how we can create a data management plan. So here we are on our dashboard. We see a list of your current projects or DMPs that you are working on, either a owner on or you've a plan has been shared with you. And we have some helpful links, including an email address to get help with DMPs and the DMP tool. So we're going to walk through creating a DMP by clicking on the Create Plan at the top. So clicking Create Plan brings us to a form to fill out some information about the project we are starting. So we enter a title for your project. You can also indicate if this project is for, educational or testing purposes. You can select the research organization if applicable. This will provide that university created guidelines if it's available that I mentioned. And lastly, you can select the funding agency you want to work with, work with their data management plan template. As you can see, there are many funding agencies with DMP templates in DMPTool. This takes some burden off of you, the researcher, to understand exactly what the funder is looking for in your DMP. However, if you select no funder, we will be automatically given the DCC template to work with, which is a great, again, generic template to work with. So we are all set to create our plan. So our project has been created. We see a few tabs to organize our work. The first tab is for project details. Here we add information like our funder, grant number, project abstract, and our contact information. On the right, there is also information about the guidance we want to see. I have selected guidance from DMPTool and the Harvard University. Depending on the template, these options may vary. So the next tab over is for contributors, and this tab prompts us to list the project's PI and those responsible for data management. Remember, as we discussed, including these roles in your DMP is essential. So the next tab over provides an overview of the plan template. Here we see some information about the DCC template and instructions for filling out the template. In this case, we see the different sections and the questions that you need to address when answering those sections. So navigating to the right plan tab shows us an accordion menu of each of our 7 sections. Each section contains text boxes for each of the questions for you to enter your information in. Additionally, we have some example text to help guide your responses. So they are similar to the examples we went through in the first part of our session. And they are those Harvard-specific examples because we have selected to include that Harvard guidance. Also on the right, we have some more guidance that has been included from this template. The guidance provides a little more advice for the information we should include in order to completely answer these questions. We see guidance from here, both the DCC and some links to Harvard-specific resources. Additionally, we can use the other tab. There is a section for comments. This is useful to make notes or communicate with others on your team as you collaboratively write your data management plan as a team. Great, so now we know we can work with others on our data management plan. So the Share tab allows us to set our plan visibility and manage those collaborators. So we can invite our collaborators with their email. If they are already using DMPTool, they will see this plan on their dashboard and they'll receive an email. If they're not currently using DMPTool, they will just receive an email inviting them to the tool so that they can then collaborate on your plan. You can even invite collaborators outside your institution. So if you have a cross-institutional project, you can still interact with your entire team. And there are some different permission levels. So co-owners have admin rights to the plan. Editors can view the plan, answer questions or comment. And then the read-only option, people can only view the plan or comment. So this is good, for example, if you want someone to just review your plan, like someone from the library. You can add a read-only member who can then come in, view your plan, and then add in those comments to help you refine your plan. And then the last tab is for downloading your plan. And you can indicate what elements of your plan you want to include. And there are multiple file types that you can export your DMP, including PDF, text, or Word document. For example, with the PDF, you can add some specific text formatting. However, I actually really suggest that you export your plan as a Word document, that docx, as you may have to do some manual formatting to ensure that your plan is only 2 pages, if that's a requirement from your funder. So now you have a data management plan ready to submit with a grant application and utilize as a guiding document for any research project. Great, I'll pause again if there are any additional questions at this point, but I'm actually gonna go into DMPTool, walk through some of those steps we just went through the screenshots, but I'll walk through and then I'm gonna demo the new HMS template that we have created. So I'm gonna flip over to DMPTool, and you must be logged into the DMPTool and a Harvard University affiliate to use this template. So let's quickly sign in. Again, walking through some of these steps that we already went through the sign-in process. I signed in earlier, so it looks like the Harvard key remembered that. So I'm successfully logged in. We see some of the latest data management plans that I have been working on. So there is, you're getting a kind of behind the scene look here, but there are some templates. This HMS template that we can use, and we've tailored this specifically for biomedical and research projects. So I am going to share the link to this unique template that you can use. Hopefully, when you access the link that I've added into the chat, you will be able to then use this plan. That's my hope, is that works. Let's try it for myself. Yes, if you are logged in and a Harvard affiliate, you should get a prompt like this that's asking you, do you want to create a plan based on the HMS DMP template? Would love some feedback if you are following along, that successfully worked with you. Again, if you're not Harvard, you probably will not have access to this part of the demo. Anyone willing to give me a thumbs up or a it worked? Thank you for sharing. Awesome. I hope it worked for some other Harvard members who are on the call. But let's take a look at what this template includes. So I'm going to walk through quickly on how you could go about creating your data management plan here. So ideally, we would like a nice descriptive project title rather than, Julie's plan. But I don't have an example off the top of my head unless someone wants to throw something into the chat that we could do. So you would include a nice, project title here. You would also include a nice abstract. If you wanted to, test this out before actually creating anything, that's where you could indicate that this is a test. So I'm going to do that since this is not a real project. You do have some additional information that you could fill in about the project start, where the funding is coming from. Maybe you have a grant number. Make sure we save this information here. Just want to go quickly back to the project details before moving on, because we want to ensure that we're selecting our guidance. So again, we can select where we want to get some, guidance from. So we can select, DMPTool. That's kind of why we're here. So we want to ensure that we're getting some DMPTool help. At Harvard University, we have some Harvard guidance. So Harvard's a big place, so there's lots of different resources and policies. So we could indicate we want Harvard, and then if we're specifically at the medical school, there's some specific guidance for this community. Additionally, we could see that this is kind of a list of all the institutions and organizations that use the data management, the DMP tool. So if we were interested in what some of these other institutions are saying about creating a data management plan, we could do that as well. But for instance, if you're at one of these institutions, it's good to always check if your institution has some guidance. So let's save this and move on. Again, you need to list, your PI and other contributors on your plan. I'm going to skip over that for now to get to our plan overview, to look at this, this template that we've created. This template has been created specifically, again, for the Harvard biomedical community. It's really an agnostic template, so you can use it for a variety of grant options, as well as I mentioned earlier, any research project. And then there's some steps for how you can successfully use our project, including some information about the examples that we have provided, how to ensure that you're getting the most out of the template and using the guidance that I just kind of went through. So let's look at the right plan tab to see how our template has been set up. So looking at our first section for data collection, you'll see a lot of the same kind of introductory information we saw with that DCC template. Some overarching information about what to include here, and then some questions. But down here is where it gets more specific to our template. We've really expanded our Harvard example answers here for you that really focus on biomedical data examples. So if you are looking for, really some help in creating the correct language that you should be including in your plan, this is going to be really good guidance for you to use. Additionally, as I mentioned, we have some guidance, links to additional, webinars, videos, and documentation about creating plans, as well as information from the DMPTool. Here it's talking, about data formats. And we talked about including those specific data formats that you'll be working with in your data collection section. Let's just look at another section quickly. For example, I believe it's in the data sharing section where we've really kind of taken this to the next level. So yes, we have, again, some information about what to include here, how, the questions that you should answer. Again, some links out to Harvard specific resources, including, and the DMPTool guidance. But here, we have lots of examples that we're providing to our community to help them really understand exactly, what type of data sharing you'll be doing. This is the type of answer that you should be including in your plan. So here we have examples for, local sharing, putting it in a repository, and then also examples for, the exact type of data you're working with, especially if you're working with patient and genomic data. Some of these examples can be quite long. So we see some examples that are long, some examples that are short. Again, really going to depend on the type of data you're working with and the, ultimate, goals of your research project. So it's we're giving you a spectrum here, which hopefully speaks to most projects that are out there. And here we see an example of where we have some Harvard guidance, some Harvard Medical School guidance, and some DMPTool guidance. So plenty of ways to get more information to help you fill out your data management plan. And then this is that comments box that I mentioned where, this is where someone could leave some comments to share with your collaborators on the text that you've entered into your answer text box. Let's just quickly walk through the last two tabs before we end here. So again, we can share this with our team members or invite. Again, you can invite me, a librarian, to review and help you with your plan if that is something that would be useful to you. And then we can download our plan in a variety of formats. If you are at Harvard and you do plan to use that template that I shared with you, we would love your feedback as you notice that template is not officially published yet. It's still in the works. So we would love your feedback if you do plan to use that template. But we hope it will be a great resource to our community. I will jump back to our slides here and just want to wrap up our session today. So in review, remember, data management is really important to keep your data safe and make your data usable and discoverable. Data management plans include strategies for strategies and processes to organize, describe, preserve, and share your data. Again, a data management plan is a living, working document. It should be frequently referred to and updated as your project goes. And then a DMP tool is a key resource with those templates and that guidance to help you really create that data management plan that is going to be actionable, shareable, and editable. You can learn more about DMPs, find more examples and more information on the DMP tool on our website. I put the link into the chat. So I want to thank you all for joining our Love Data Week webinar today. The recording and the slides will be made available. I'll send them to you in an email. They'll also be available via our website. And again, I would appreciate your feedback on today's session and then all of our Love Data Week activities. So please fill out the survey at the link provided on the slide. If you have any additional questions, please enter them into the chat. I can take a few minutes to answer those. Thanks.